So welcome, everybody. If you can see me, my name is Laura Rossi. I'm the Executive Director of the Westchester Community Foundation. And welcome to our program titled A Legacy of Values, Writing Your Ethical Will, featuring Rabbi Pamela Wax. I will be admitting folks into the room while providing these opening remarks. We're delighted to see so many of you. Before we get started, please note this is a Zoom meeting, and that does mean we can all see one another, which is lovely. I look forward to the day when we can gather in person, and I'm hoping that's before the end of this year. Here's the format for our hour. Rabbi Pamela Wax has a terrific presentation, and there are opportunities for a general discussion. We ask that you please put yourself on mute now and select speaker view, which is probably a little easier because Rabbi Wax has a presentation and it will be easier for you to follow her presentation. So I'm going to just give everybody a moment to go on mute and put your setting on speaker view. Please note this program is being recorded. And we're going to presume that you are all okay with that. During the presentation, I have no doubt you will have questions, observations, thoughts, reflections. If you have questions, please send them to me, Laura Rossi, in the chat box. I'll be monitoring the box and will prompt reading these questions to Rabbi Wax as appropriate, if not during the presentation, at the end. And that's it. It's a very straightforward format designed to be informal and inspiring. And we really encourage folks to get into a space to share your thoughts and reflections about ethical wills. Also, please note that this coming April, Rabbi Wax will be providing a 3-part workshop via Zoom for those who are interested in writing your own ethical will. And we'll be sharing information about that both at the end of our time and via a follow-up email. So stay tuned for that as well. Now to introduce our speaker, Rabbi Pamela Wax has served as the Spiritual Care Coordinator at Westchester Jewish Community Services for the past 18 years. She offers spiritual counseling and runs the Jewish Spiritual Healing Center, facilitating spiritual support groups and teaching on topics ranging from Musar, bereavement, estranged families, wise aging, the afterlife, spiritual memoir, and ethical wills. Her essays and articles on Judaism, spirituality, mental health, and women's issues, as well as her poems, have been published widely. And I'm thrilled to have gotten to know her and excited to turn this hour over to Rabbi Wax. And off we go.
Off we go. What a delight to be here. Thank you all for coming. I'll be really curious what brought you. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Legacy of Values, Writing Your Ethical Will, a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to start with a biblical quote. Ethical wills have a long Jewish history, but it has of course become important in beyond religion. But I will start with this biblical verse from Genesis. And Abraham gave everything that was his to his son Isaac. But to his sons by concubines, Abraham gave gifts. And this pretty straightforward quote comes with a lot of commentary, because the commentators come to ask, well, if he gave everything to his son Isaac, how did he have anything left to give to his sons through concubines? And of course, the answer is that the material gifts that he gave to his sons by the concubines counted as if they were nothing. That what was everything was the spiritual legacy that he gave to his son Isaac, which was everything but the material. Stephen Covey, whom you might know as the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, teaches there are 4 needs in all people: to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. So some of you, I'm going to raise a poll question for you. Question number 1, I have either received an ethical will and or I have already written or started to write my own ethical will. Do you see that on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is number 1 only to answer. Please answer yes, no, or I'm not sure if you choose to respond. If this is working correctly, I should see numbers as you press 1, A, B, or C. Do you have a sense that you may have ever received an ethical will, or that you're not sure, or that you are writing one? Only answer question 1, please, not question 2. I only see 2 people responding thus far. Anybody else?
You have to hit submit.
Yes, I believe if it's there, you need to hit it for it to click.
But you have to answer all 3 questions in order to submit.
Oh, really? Oh, so this poll, okay, I did not create it, so I think maybe it was done. So I'm going to ask the questions, and I guess we won't see your answers because I want to present them one at a time. Maybe I need to just ask the question. Is anybody here, and feel free to unmute yourselves, ever received one? And if your answer was yes, I'd love to hear your voice, because there was one yes. Okay. Anybody already tried your hand at writing one? I'd love to hear your voice because I'm not following the chat. Okay, so hopefully this will inspire you. Jordy.
Well, I started it years and years ago, maybe as much as 10, and it's just sitting on the computer. I haven't looked at it in a very long time, so I figured this would be a good time to open the file again. I really hit a roadblock, though. I felt that I was ending up with a lot of cliches.
Okay. So there are 3 different history forms, life history forms. The first would be what we would call a genealogy, which might include family trees, even a family medical tree, trace lines of descent from ancestors, and this would be very factual with names, dates, and locations. A second life history form would be more along the lines of a memoir, personal history. It could include things like recipes, community histories. It might have photographs, scrapbooks, and that kind of thing. But ethical, and it might even include a little bit of ethical will, but ethical will as its own sort of life history form goes beyond the memoir of telling the story and the scenes to distill themes, discern the meaning and value of a life, and then harvest it for wisdom. It really has that moral intent. An ethical will can be woven throughout a personal history or exist as a separate chapter. And it can be completely freestanding in audio, video, or written form. So these 3 different life history forms, you might want to think of the genealogy as the skeleton or the bones, the personal history as the muscle and tissue, and the ethical will as the organs, especially the heart and the guts. And often it's said about ethical wills, words from the heart enter the heart. So the second poll question, which apparently I might have to have you answer all 3 questions at once, it looks like. is if I were to create an ethical will, I would like to do it in writing or as a video multimedia project. And I see that so far, those who responded, the writing idea appeals more. That's a small sample of you. And that obviously would be the traditional form.
I have managed to lose the poll. I closed it in order to be able to see you and the slides. Can you resend it?
So it's not up anymore, so you didn't lose
Oh.
it.
Thank you. Okay.
Not to worry. I decided not really to launch it because it required you to answer all 3 questions the way it was set up. So I'm now sharing a screen. You should see Erica Brown, who wrote a book called Happier Endings, who suggested that ethical wills might come to answer 3 questions. Do those I care about know what is most important to me and what I've learned through experience? 2, have I said everything I need to say to family and friends? And 3, do those nearest and dearest to me know my burial wishes? Now, not all ethical wills contain burial wishes, but often they do. Why do it? So we've already suggested that an ethical will helps you discern and bequeath values and beliefs, but it can also be an avenue to forgiveness, making amends and reconciliation. Although when I do my workshops, we talk about not guilting from the grave. So it's a very fine line how you do that forgiveness work without a survivor carrying guilt. It should be used as a last resort for anything that's outstanding emotionally in life. 3rd, it can offer expressions of gratitude. It may contain specific instructions, as I said, around burial and mourning preferences. It may offer blessings and prayers for present and future generations. It may or may not include significant personal and family stories, which was that genealogies, number 2, the tissue part of the body. And it may offer, and this I know is relevant for some of you in your professional work, it may offer a rationale behind the legal will of inheritance and charitable giving. So I want to pick up there about that possibility of using it in conjunction with a legal will of inheritance and charitable giving. So in more recent years, estate attorneys, financial planners, and others have learned how the ethical will can be helpful before and after death in values clarification, in financial life and legacy planning, and ultimately, hopefully, in diminishing family conflict around the estate. In the 1950s, Samuel Lipsitz wrote an ethical will. He was a New England businessman, and this is part of his ethical will. He said, "Somewhere among these papers is a will made out by a lawyer. Its purpose is to dispose of any material things which I may possess at the time of my departure from this world to the unknown adventure beyond. I hope its terms will cause no ill will among you. It seemed sensible when I made it. After all, it refers only to material things which we enjoy only temporarily. I am more concerned with having you inherit something that is vastly more important. There must be a purpose in the creation of man, because I believe that, as I hope you will someday, for without it, life becomes meaningless. I hope you will live right, live together in harmony." More contemporary, this is about 20 years ago, Richard Mastromattaio, I probably mispronounced his name, a businessman, wrote, "Being in your business and being successful and passing all the wealth down is one thing, but all you've learned, all your philosophies, all your experiences, how did they get passed down?" And here's an excerpt from somebody who themselves is a financial advisor. I got it from this website, personallegacyadvisors.com, but it didn't give a name of the author. We want our money to help you and not hurt you. It will help if it grants you access, flexibility, and opportunity. It will hurt if it provides an easy exit from challenges and dilemmas that you need to face in order to grow into strong, successful adults. The most important matter is not how you got your money or how you're going to spend it. It's how you are going to spend your lives and what kind of people you are going to be. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions or comments thus far, if anything came through to you, Laura, in the chat.
No questions yet.
Okay, so I'm going to pause here, though, and see if there are any questions. Feel free to unmute yourselves. And if not, I'll move on.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm reflecting on Jordy's comment about cliche. Is that what you said, Jordy? You know, sort of putting it aside because feeling like, you know, does this sound like a cliche? I'm looking at you and nodding like you can see me, but I think that was what you're, you know, and I'm just wondering what your reaction to that. Is that a common experience that you find?
So that's where, when I do these workshops, I work very closely with people so that it really is their ethical will. Nobody else could have written it, because they need to be gleaning from their own life experience and putting that down on paper.
It wasn't that so much as the feeling that I couldn't find the words to say it in a way that didn't sound so general as not to carry enough weight.
So that's where, you know, we would look at a number of example ethical wills and see what you like about each one and how you might model your own after that, what works in some of these models. Yeah. So let me share the screen again and move on. And one of my favorite ethical wills comes from Sam Levinson, who was a Jewish humorist in the 1970s. I think he had a radio program or a TV program. His reads, "I leave you my unpaid debts. They are my greatest assets. Everything I own, I owe. To America, I owe a debt for the opportunity it gave me to be free and to be me. To my parents, I owe America. They gave it to me and I leave it to you. Take good care of it. To the biblical tradition, I owe the belief that man does not live by bread alone, nor does he live alone at all. This is also the democratic tradition. Preserve it. To the 6 million of my people and 30 million other humans who died because of man's inhumanity to man, I owe a vow that it must never happen again. I leave you not everything I never had, but everything I had in my lifetime. A good family, respect for learning, compassion for my fellow man, and some 4-letter words for all occasions. Words like help, give, care, feel, and love." And then he goes on directly to his grandchildren to define what he understands about love to be and what mercy and brotherhood are. And he says, "The millennium will come when all the ain'ts shall become ises and all the ises shall be for all, even for those you don't like. Finally, I leave you the years I should like to have lived so that I might possibly see whether your generation will bring more love and peace to the world than ours did. I not only hope that you will, I pray that you will." It's short, it's exquisite, definitely one of my favorites. President-elect Obama wrote a letter that's public to Malia and Sasha about why he was running to be president, and he wrote it January 18th, 2009. He wrote, when I was a young man, I thought life was all about me, about how I'd make my way in the world, become successful, and get the things I want. But then the two of you came into my world with all your curiosity and mischief and those smiles that never fail to fill my heart and light up my day. And suddenly all my big plans for myself didn't seem so important anymore. I soon found that the greatest joy in my life was the joy I saw in yours. And I realized that my own life wouldn't count for much unless I was able to ensure that you had every opportunity for happiness and fulfillment in yours. In the end, girls, that's why I ran for president, because of what I want for you and for every child in this nation. So I want to pause here because this was a letter. He didn't call it an ethical will, but in effect, it was an ethical will. So I want to go back to the question, did you ever receive one? Because you may have received a very significant letter that didn't have the title ethical will, but was something you got from parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles or siblings that you might want to reconstrue as an ethical will now that you reflect on this. So I'm wondering if seeing that one from President Obama you might answer that other question differently. Anyone? Okay. I have to say that usually somebody says yes. That it makes them think again about something that they received from a relative in a new light. Kathy, were you going to say something? You're muted.
Well, if you would think about a verbal ethical will, I think I got that kind of wisdom and information from my grandmother over the course of her life, but nothing written. But it was those kinds of her values and really, right, very important bits of wisdom that I still remember and are very important to me.
We're going to come back to that. So thank you about whether that counts. It's verbal. It's a great question. I do want to entertain that.
Okay.
So I have been fortunate that over the years, a number of people I've worked with have let me use their ethical wills for my teaching. And this is a short excerpt from S's ethical will in which she reflects on generosity. It's a very long ethical will, actually, with a lot of different values she wants to pass on. But in generosity, she says, give money you earn and receive, and also volunteer your time generously. When you share your blessings, you get far more wealth in return, which I thought was beautiful. And the third question on the poll question, if you see it, right now, I think the best opening line of my own ethical will would be, potentially, A, the most transformative events or people of my life were, great opening line. B, the spiritual values or ideals that I live by are, ... C, the mistakes I've made in my life have taught me, ... Or D, what I hope for you is, ... So if you didn't already answer that question, feel free to respond. Very curious which one speaks to you here. So, of 9 of you, 1 says the most transformative events. 3 said the spiritual values. Nobody wants to start with the mistakes that have informed my life. And then 6 of you, the most, what I hope for you is, that you want to start with the blessings or the hopes for whoever you're writing this for, which is beautiful. But I want to say that I always try to write my own when I offer a class, and depending on what that opening line is, it ends up very differently. So you could, depending on where you start, end up with multiple versions of an ethical will that then becomes a project in itself, how to edit and revise so that it becomes one document and doesn't feel disparate. So here are some other possible opening questions. This comes from a document by Linda Blackman. What do you believe in? What values do you try to live by? What do you care about? This is not what you're saying to whoever you're addressing your ethical will is, but the things for you to consider as you write your own. What do you really care about? Have you spent at least some of your time pursuing what you say you care about? What do you stand for? How does your life show that? What have you learned in your time here so far? What have you gleaned from your losses and mistakes? What to you is the good? What is a good enough life, a long enough life? What wisdom can you offer them about how to live and how to love? If there are children in your life, what kind of world do you want them to inherit? Which goes to the Sam Levinson ethical will. What kind of people do you want them to be? What heartaches and unresolved conflicts are you not dealing with because there's no time? When your time comes, and it will, what will you be happy to say you did with your one wild and precious life, if you know that wonderful poem by Mary Oliver? So these are the kinds of questions I would have people sit with, before we even start to write an ethical will, to really do some values clarification and setting some priorities. And again, not making an ethical will generic, that it really comes from your own experience. So those are the slides for us, leaving us 15 minutes for Q&A. And Laura, I'm going to give you the floor to sort of moderate that, unless I see a hand. I'll see if you've got questions in the chat.
Sure. I know some folks are asking about getting a copy of this after the meeting because there's so much to absorb here. You're definitely planting a lot of seeds.
Well, I know that I
thoughts.
can't send the PowerPoint because I couldn't even send it to you. So
Oh,
I
dear.
have to cut and
We'll
paste
find a way.
a document.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I certainly would also hope that some of these people might want to really engage in writing their own and sign up for that workshop.
Yeah.
They would get this material
We'll
and
find a way to get follow-up material. So I have a question, and that is what got you interested in this work and in this process.
So there are a number of compilations of ethical wills. One is currently called So That Your Values Live On, compiled by Rabbi Jack Reamer and Nathaniel Stamfer. Its first version did not have a how-to. The second version has a whole section in the back about how to write your own and opening questions and that kind of thing. And when that second version came out, I bought it for my father. My mother had died, and I was devastated that she died without leaving me an ethical will. And I said to myself, I want to get one from my dad. So I bought him this book, had it wrapped already for Hanukkah, and I was supposed to see him the third or fourth night of Hanukkah. And shockingly, the first night of Hanukkah, when I was having a party, I got a call that he had died suddenly of a heart attack. And I, again, was devastated that here it was. I had really wanted this thing I knew was part and parcel of my tradition. Didn't get it from my mom, was going to teach my dad about it. And then I realized this is why I want to come back to Kathy's question. I had all the wisdom. I knew what he would have put into an ethical will. Of course I knew. But to know that your parents have taken the time, or your grandparents, or your aunt, whoever has taken the time to write or videotape is a whole other layer of knowing what the wisdom is. And so that's why it's become important to me that, yes, I know what the wisdom was. I know what the values were. They were certainly passed down. But the gift of that tangible thing is something I still regret not having. And others might feel otherwise, that it's enough, but to me, it would have been a family heirloom,
Mhm.
And there were some significant letters when I was away at camp and so forth.
Mm. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts or reflections? And
Kathy.
Sure. So I'm thinking, when would one
Great
give,
question.
if one writes an ethical
Beautiful,
will,
beautiful.
when would one give it? So I've got a couple of thoughts on that. What I think I would want to do, but I'm interested in what Rabbi Wax or somebody else has to say about when
Okay.
when you give it.
Right. So traditionally it was part and parcel of, after death. So I've had students who have their lawyer, it's with their legal papers, the lawyer has it. I had one student who has it in her top end table drawer, and her daughter knows to go there. Her daughter hasn't seen it, but knows where to find it, that it's important for her mother. That's the first thing she sees after she dies. I have known people who have had the discussion before death. And I had told Laura just something happened recently with one of my students who'd been working with me for 3 years on her ethical will in preparation for her 80th birthday. And she knew there was going to be a big 80th birthday party, and she wanted to present the ethical will to her grandchildren and her children. So just 5 weeks ago or so, she reported back what happened after that big party, which was just, I think, over Christmas. And how amazing it was to have the conversation after she wrote this ethical will with them all, because it was part of the birthday celebration that they discuss her ethical will. And she had quite a story, that goes along with that ethical will. So it can be done. I also want to say that in the Jewish tradition, the ethical will is supposed to be revised every High Holy Days, because the High Holy Days are when, we may or may not be written into the book of life. And so it's an opportune time to reflect on the past year, do any revisions. I've never spoken to Rabbi Jeffrey Siegelman about it, but my understanding before he retired from Westchester Jewish Center was that he read a new ethical will from the pulpit every Yom Kippur. It was addressed to his children, but read publicly about what he had learned in the past year leading up to that High Holy Day period.
Rabbi, this is Larry Thal. That's my congregation. He did it for 32 years, I believe.
Oh, Larry, I'm so glad you're here to confirm that.
Yeah, and then he published them for everyone.
I do have the book that somebody gave to me as a gift. Yes, wonderful.
Oh.
And it was, am I right that he addressed each one to his children, and it was?
Yes, but it had such general applicability for values. Right. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So yes, it does not have to be only offered after one dies. And so, Kathy, what were you thinking when you asked the question?
Well, I was thinking that if you go to the trouble to write it, it's because you have experiences you want to share. And I expect to live a lot longer. I would like to share my experiences now, not wait
Beautiful.
20 or 30 years. But waiting is interesting because then I do estate planning for a living. And I say to my clients, your will is your last word. You get the last word. Nobody's going to interrupt you. Nobody's going to contradict you. So the idea of waiting on the ethical will is interesting because then you get the last word. So what's more important, the last word or the discussion? And it's going to depend, I'm sure, from person to person and at different times of your life. But I definitely like the idea of writing it, revising it, and sharing it, I think, as you go along, because your views change, your ethics change, your values change. And I think that the process is at least as important as the product. And the conversation is important. So
Yes, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Kathy
I'm gonna think about
Weinstock, I see a hand.
I actually agree. My name is Marie DaCosta. I work at the New York Community Trust, and we're affiliated with the Westchester Community Foundation. And I do development for the organization. And I saw in the chat that somebody had asked when is the right time to do this? And Kathy, with you bringing this up. So I've worked with a lot of donors who are grappling with their last will and testament or their estate planning. But somehow having this ethical will as part of the conversation really helps get to a much deeper level. There is no perfect time to write an ethical will. In my opinion, from what I've seen working with so many donors, it's appropriate at any time in life that you feel is right. So you could start when you are young and growing your family, thinking about what life lessons you'd like to pass on to future generations. Think about what you would like to share with your family, the memories, lessons learned, experiences that Rabbi Wax explained in her presentation. And it can be an ongoing journey. So you don't have to write the whole thing in one sitting. I mean, I can give you an example. I have a donor who started to put this document together in her late 70s. And she invited her 2 children to join her in doing this, as they had young children of their own. So it became a family affair. And I found it extremely moving to hear her share how valuable this was for remembering those long gone in her life, her parents, her grandparents, the 70-plus-year-old donor, as well as helping to pass on her values to her children and they to theirs. So she shared that her ethical will became a living document where she added to it in times of reflection, whether in moments of happiness or even challenging situations. And that's how she built the legacy that she would pass along to her family, even sharing her spiritual guiding principles. And that accompanied her last will and testament when she was reviewing it, because, you should review your legal will every couple of years after a certain point in your life, and consider other estate planning instruments. So, from my end, from working for a nonprofit, it's so important to also help them to pass on their values and communicate that to their children as to, for instance, why are you a donor to the Westchester Community Foundation? Why? It's important to you. And you can in your legal will, you can say, I want X% of my estate to go to the Westchester Community Foundation or to whatever nonprofit you love and have been supporting for so long. But it's great to also share the reasons why, so that stays generation to generation. So just want to chime in and share that.
Yes. I had one student once, he wrote weekly emails to his grandchildren. It was Grandpa's Wisdom was the subject line. And then after a couple of years, he went through all of these emails and gleaned the ones he thought were most useful and created a book out of just those passages. So there are different ways of doing this, especially with technological advances. Some people do videotape themselves as opposed to writing. So that's an option as well.
I noticed, Kathy, did you have your hand up?
No,
Weinstock.
Kathy Weinstock, yes, go ahead.
So I'm a psychotherapist, so I'm coming from the point of view of the sense of vulnerability that somebody can have in sharing something like what's most important to you and what you would like your whomever your, I don't have grandchildren, so my children. And when you said the last word, last will and testament, the last word, there can't be any reaction. And I can see that in many ways. It's wonderful to share and have the reaction. I'm also mindful of how it can bring up a lot of vulnerability. That let's say you have certain values that are important to you, that maybe you're concerned that your offspring or whomever doesn't share that, and then what might transpire if it becomes a living conversation. Just mindful of that piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there is a lot of weight when something is written down, that a child or the grandchild can go back to and reflect. If somebody took the time to write it down, it's different than having the verbal conversation. You can return to it in a different way for reflection, and you change too over time. So 10 years from now, it might look different. Lauren Schenfeld, I saw your virtual hand.
I'm interested in the tone in cases where people aren't fortunate enough to assume that the people who will read the letter share their values, or that they were transmitted to them or accepted, but who live different lives. And the tone is very important when something is written down and you can't see the reaction.
Yes. Yes. So, as I said before, guilt from the grave kind of thing. And I've seen people's first drafts where that's been there, and that's part of the conversation and my helping them revise. You want this to come from love, even when there's disagreement. So the tone, if you're going to do it, should be from love and blessing, is how
Thank you.
I would hope it would be used.
Good way to think of it.
Larry, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think Sam Levinson, who you quote, has been attributed with this quote, that the reason that grandchildren get along so well is that they share a common enemy. So I wanted to bring that into with the psychological aspect here, that sometimes when you write to I don't have grandchildren, but if you write to, I remember corresponding with my own grandparents, and there were a lot of good life lessons in there. They weren't cold and ethical will, but they helped guide me. And that's why I like the multi-generation approach, because it can break down some barriers that might exist, that you might not want to confront values or confront. You're talking about vulnerabilities and whatnot. So sometimes it might be good to have that 3 generations involved in the conversation.
Okay, you just remind me to say something else, though. You can write different ethical wills for different family members. It doesn't have to be one general one that one size fits all, or one that has a paragraph to Joe and a paragraph to Susan. So, again, I have people who say, the kids know it. It's the grandkids I'm writing to, because they don't know these stories and they don't know my values. And so they're actually skipping the children in how they write it. Or the one who, has a grandson with some significant issues and feels like he deserves a special one. So all kinds of food for thought here. And I know our time is limited, so I don't know if there are other questions.
So we'll be providing Rabbi Wax's contact information with a follow-up email to everybody, and also sharing information about the workshop that's being offered in 3 Zoom sessions in April. And Rabbi Wax, should I just put that flyer up now?
Sure,
Or-
and then I know you'll send it.
Yeah, I'll send that as well. So let me just make sure I can get that up for everybody. Okay, so this is the flyer that we'll be sending around. It's again a description of the goal of writing an ethical will. And here are the dates: April 6th, 13th, and 27th, midday. There's a modest fee. It's being presented by WJCS. And here's Rabbi Wax's contact information. So we'll be sending this flyer around, and also information about the Jewish Spiritual Healing Center and what that's all about.
And that one
So
article
stay
that I
tuned.
had sent to you, Laura, about how estate lawyers are used, an old article, but an interesting
An
article.
old article.
Estate
Yes.
lawyers are using now.
We'll send that around as well. Yeah. And we'll figure out how to get the content from the PowerPoint circulated as
Great.
well. There's so much to absorb. I guess the biggest question I'm sitting with, which you don't have to answer, is like, how do you get started? You know, and I think it seems like you just start. You just start putting it down and thinking about what you want to share.
You take
And-
her workshop.
That's what I said. You
and
take it-
of course, and take the workshop. Yeah. Yeah. But thank you, everybody, for joining us and participating. Frank, thank you.
Thank
Did you have a
you.
question?
No, just to thank you. It's very, very enlightening and helpful.
Wonderful.